Everyone knew something was wrong the moment Grandpa Hank whispered my name over the phone. Just one word. Jack. Quiet. Strained. Scared. And that man never got scared. By the time Melissa and I hit the road, I could barely keep my hand steady on the wheel. Her hand clutched mine tighter than the tires gripped the asphalt. There were no sirens, no warnings, just perfectly manicured lawns, silent sprinklers clicking back into place, and a creeping dread tightening around. My ribs like a vice. But nothing could have prepared me for what we saw when we pulled up. The garage door was gaping open, like a wounded mouth. And stuffed inside, bumper to bumper, were two monster trucks, all chrome and arrogance, jammed together like some steel centipede. Behind them, crushed into the back wall, was Grandpa's pride, a 1967 candy apple red Mustang. His first, love after Grandma, and locked beyond that, his woodshop, his sanctuary. This wasn't parking. This was a siege. I stepped forward like I was walking into a crime scene. Melissa stayed close, her fingers brushing against my arm, silent, steady, like she could feel the war inside me rising. Who did this? My voice came out low, dangerous. Hank's eyes, once sharp, now dulled with quiet fury, shifted toward me. Her, he said. Of course. Karen Blake, queen of the HOA, tyrant of the trimmed hedges, dictator of the dead-end street. Her reign had started with ridiculous bylaws and graduated to full-blown tyranny. And now she'd crossed a line. She used the master key, Grandpa muttered, let herself in, drove him in, locked it up. Before I could respond, red and blue lights lit up the curb. Officer Diaz stepped out, calm and matter-of-fact, like she'd seen too many HOA tantrums to be surprised anymore. She barely had time to say, "Getting an early start today, Hank?" before a white Lexus screeched to a halt. The Queen herself had arrived. Karen Blake stormed out like a reality TV villain, all sharp heels, brittle blonde hair, and an expression of pure disgust. She didn't ask questions. She demanded action. "Officer, arrest him," she barked, pointing at Grandpa like he'd stolen her dog. Diaz sighed. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." But Karen didn't hear her. She stormed past us, ignoring the officer, jabbing numbers into Grandpa's garage keypad like she was trying to force the door open with pure entitlement. And that's when the neighbors started showing up. First Fred in his bathrobe. Then the Hendersons. Then Mrs. Patel with her dog still leashed. One by one, doors creaked open, phones came out, and Westgate Meadows found itself with front row seats to Karen Blake's grand meltdown. And still, she pounded on that keypad. Still, she screamed about collateral and fines and public nuisance violations. But the code had been changed months ago. Her fists met steel. Officer Diaz stepped forward, voice hard now. "That's enough. You're trespassing." Karen spun around like she'd been slapped. "He's violating HOA bylaws. Those trucks are mine." The lies spilled from her lips faster than the sweat on her forehead. The crowd wasn't buying it. They murmured, filmed, shared looks of disbelief. And for once, she saw it. The power slipping. Diaz issued a ticket. Karen ripped it from her hand, shredded it, and hissed through gritted teeth. She promised war. And as she peeled out, tires screaming, down the road she left something worse than damage. She left a threat. The trucks remained in the garage, choking the bay. Grandpa's eyes flicked toward the Mustang, then to the workbench beyond, and for the first time I saw it in his face. Not anger. Not even grief. Defeat. That night, as we sat together in silence, the weight of what she'd done settled over us like smoke. This wasn't about parking anymore. It wasn't even about bylaws or fines. This was personal. Karen had found Grandpa's joy and put it in a cage. I couldn't let her win. But the problem with taking on a tyrant is knowing where to start. Because Karen Blake hadn't always been a monster. She'd built herself into one, brick by bitter brick. Before she was the HOA queen, she was just another divorcee with a big settlement and a chip on her shoulder. The neighbors pitied her at first. She complained about everything. Kids laughing too loud, garden. Gnomes, wind chimes that sounded too whimsical. She saw rebellion where the rest of us saw life. And when the HOA presidency opened up, she didn't just volunteer. She lobbied. She rewrote the bylaws, weaponized them, measured our grass, timed our trash bins, painted the world beige. Nobody wanted a fight, so we just adapted. Moved gnomes, hid recyclables. But Grandpa Hank? He was cut from a different cloth. A cloth that didn't fold. When Karen fined him for the sound of his table saw, a saw he only used during permitted hours, he didn't grumble. He wrote her back. "See you in court." She dropped it, but she never forgot it. He became her enemy, the one rebel who wouldn't bow, and now she'd taken aim at everything he loved. His tools, his Mustang, his refuge. The next morning, a white HOA envelope arrived in the mail. 5 violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. $500 for improper vehicle storage, the very truck she had dumped in his garage. $250 for unapproved modifications said because he locked the garage door. Another $1,000 in absurd fines for public nuisance, non-permitted workshop, and aggressive behavior. A total of $1,750. A masterpiece of petty revenge. And still, Grandpa said nothing. He stacked the notices, laid them on the counter, and walked out to the garage. But that night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., flashing lights lit up our street. 2 police, cruisers, sirens, a nightmare scene. They were at Grandpa's door, hands near their holsters. "One call," the officer said. Chainsaw noises and a woman screaming. Melissa and I stood barefoot in the dew, watching as they searched Grandpa's apartment. No chainsaw, no woman. Just a quiet old man in a flannel robe. It was a trap. A psychological assault. Karen had made her move, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, and I was done playing by her rules. This wasn't just her kingdom, this was our home, and she was about to learn what happened when you backed the wrong family into a corner. The silence after the sirens was worse than the noise. Grandpa Hank stood in his doorway, the red and blue reflections dancing across his tired face. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. We all understood what had just happened. Karen Blake hadn't sent a message. She'd declared war. That 911 call was no mistake. No prank. It was precision intimidation, designed to rattle an old man at his most vulnerable. A lie carefully crafted to get 2 officers with guns to surround his bedroom at 2 a.m. And it worked, but it did something else too. It woke something up in me. Something deeper than anger. Purpose. I wasn't just going to defend Grandpa. I was going to dismantle the empire Karen built, brick by beige brick, and she'd never see it coming. The next morning, while the rest of the neighborhood whispered behind curtains and shared clips of Karen's garage freakout, I made my first move. I requested copies of the HOA board meeting minutes, financial records, budget proposals, anything that could show what strings Karen was pulling behind closed doors. I didn't expect transparency, and I didn't get it. Her response was cold and rehearsed. These documents are under administrative review and cannot be released until the upcoming annual meeting, 6 months away. A wall of red tape. She was using the system she'd built, the rules she'd rewritten, to hide behind. Every channel I tried was blocked, ignored, delayed. Every polite request was met with the same condescending brush-off, and the fines kept coming. Another envelope. Then 2 more, each more absurd than the last. An HOA violation for unauthorized garden equipment. A $300 charge because Hank had installed a new lock on his own garage. A threat of lien action if the fines weren't paid. This wasn't bureaucracy, it was harassment with a letterhead. I wasn't alone in my frustration. Melissa saw it too. The slow squeeze Karen was putting on us, on Hank, on the neighborhood. "You're playing by her rules, Jack," she said one night, watching me pace with a stack of unread HOA paperwork. "She writes the laws. You can't beat her that way." "So what? I roll over?" "No," she said. "You stop kicking at the front door and look for a window." She was right. We didn't need documents. We needed a person, a weak link in her little regime. The HOA board was 5 people, Karen, obviously, her loyal lapdog, Stan and Margaret, both hopeless. And one other name, Linda Park. The treasurer, quiet, nervous, terrified. I remembered her from the one HOA meeting I was forced to attend. She barely spoke. Sat at the end of the table clutching a binder like it might save her from drowning. But she had one thing no one else did. Access. If there was any proof of what Karen was doing, financial or otherwise, Linda Park had seen it, maybe even kept it. But we couldn't just confront her. She'd vanish, shut down, crawl back into whatever shell Karen had built around her. We needed someone gentle, patient, someone Linda could trust. We needed Melissa. We came up with a plan. Fred, our neighbor and unofficial HOA gossip archivist, told us Linda volunteered every Saturday morning at the animal shelter. Said it was the only place he ever saw her smile. That was our open window. Melissa would accidentally run into her, strike up a conversation. No pressure, no demands. Just trust. It felt like a spy mission. We mapped it out like a heist. Timed exits, parking locations, what to say, what not to say. We had one shot. Saturday morning came. I dropped Melissa off 2 blocks from the shelter, parked down the street, and waited. The clock ticked. An hour passed. Then 2. Nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. On my way out, it didn't work. Failure. When she climbed back in the car, I could see the guilt on her face. She's too scared, Melissa said quietly. The moment I mentioned the HOA, she shut down. She said, "You don't understand what she'll do." And that was it. She's terrified of Karen. We drove home in silence. I felt like we'd just lost the only shot we had. And that night, when Hank joined us for dinner, the air felt heavier than ever. He barely touched his food, just stared down at the plate like it was some kind of test he couldn't pass. "This isn't worth it," he muttered. "Maybe I should just sell the Mustang, clear the garage, get rid of the tools, let it go." Hearing that broke me. This wasn't just about Karen's bullying anymore. It was about a man's legacy being torn down piece by piece. That night, the 3 of us sat in silence. Dishes cleared, hope gone. Until Melissa gasped. "Jack." "What is that?" She pointed at the back door. On the mat, a plain manila envelope. There was no knock, no sound, just the soft weight of something left behind. I opened it cautiously. No name, no return address. Inside, a small folded note, 5 shaky words. "She ruined my life too." And with it, a USB drive. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into the laptop. One folder appeared, HOAFINANCE. Melissa and I stared at the screen in silence. Inside were dozens, no, hundreds, of files, budgets, meeting notes, scanned bank statements, ledger spreadsheets, 7 years of data, all of it from the Westgate Meadows HOA. She'd handed us the kingdom. It had to be Linda. She couldn't speak to us, but she'd found another way to scream. We opened the files, and what we saw changed everything. 4 years back, the transactions were normal. Landscaping, pool maintenance, pest control. Then, something new appeared. Blake Consulting Services, $1,000 every month for administrative support. Then it went up, $200, $1,500 every month, over $90,000 to a company that didn't exist outside of one thing, Karen Blake's last name. "This is it," Melissa whispered. We weren't just looking at a petty tyrant. We were staring at a white-collar criminal operation. Methodical, hidden, silent. Karen had been funneling HOA funds into a fake company for years. And every fine, every violation, every dollar she stole from Grandpa, from Fred, from the Hendersons, it went straight into her own pocket. The worst part? She was still collecting. She hadn't stopped. We sat frozen, shocked. The weight of the truth almost unbearable. But with it came something else. Leverage proof. We didn't need revenge anymore. We needed exposure, and that's when the second email came. Subject line, emergency, HOA meeting, security crisis. Melissa and I read it together. Karen was calling a special community meeting. The goal: to label Hank a threat, to call a vote that could force him to sell his car, his tools, his home. She wants to finish him in public, Melissa said. Then we expose her in public, I replied. The plan formed instantly. Karen needed a projector operator, someone to help with her slideshow. I volunteered, told her I wanted to be more involved. She was so flattered she didn't question it. That night, we rehearsed every detail. I would swap her USB with ours at the moment she handed it to me. Melissa would prompt her to keep going. And when that first slide appeared, a scan of the bank statement with Blake Consulting Services written across it, we'd let the crowd decide what kind of leader they really had. We weren't just looking to defeat her, we were going to erase her. They say pride comes before the fall, but sometimes pride sends you the invitation, reserves a seat at the podium, and hands you the microphone before you even realize the noose is tightening around your neck. Karen Blake had no idea what she'd just done. She wasn't preparing to speak at an emergency HOA meeting. She was hosting her own public execution. The night of the meeting, the community center buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Usually, these things pulled a crowd of 10, maybe 15 retirees. But this time, over 50 people packed. The little room, folding chairs scraping on tile, neighbors murmuring with a mix of fear, curiosity, and something new. Hope. People smelled change in the air. They just didn't know where it was coming from yet. Melissa and Hank sat together in the third row. Grandpa wore his old flannel jacket, the same one he'd worn the day he told Karen to see him in court. He looked calm, unshakable. The kind of quiet confidence you only get when you know the truth is finally about to speak. I sat at the front table next to the projector. My laptop was connected, humming softly. Next to it, a pair of nearly identical USB drives. One belonged to Karen, the other, a bomb. I'd rehearsed the swap 20 times. It had to be flawless, timed, clean. I watched the door, then I saw her. Karen. Blake entered like royalty. Her expression was porcelain smug. Every step screamed, I own this room. And for the last time, she did. She strutted to the podium, took a moment to soak in the crowd, and tapped the mic. Feedback squealed through the speakers. Some flinched. Karen smiled. Thank you for coming tonight, she began, her voice syrupy and practiced. It breaks my heart that it has come to this. Every word dripped with false concern. She launched into a speech that would have made a politician jealous. She talked about community integrity, about behavior unbecoming of a resident, about escalating violations and threats to the neighborhood's safety. She never said Hank's name. She didn't have to. Every vague gesture toward our side of the room, every pointed phrase, it was all building to one goal, to brand Grandpa a menace, a cancer in the cul-de-sac, something that needed to be removed before it spread. The room was tense, neighbors shifting, some nodding, some whispering. And then Karen paused. Before we move to vote on disciplinary actions, she said with gravity, I have prepared a short presentation to show you all just how serious the situation has become. She turned to me. Jack, would you do the honors? Here it was. I stood. She handed me her USB drive. I took it with my left hand, slow, deliberate. As I turned, my right hand, already holding ours, came up and slid into the port beneath the laptop screen. Karen's drive went onto the table. Unused, forgotten, the swap took less than a second. I didn't even blink. Ready when you are, I said, settling into my chair. Karen beamed. Dim the lights, please, Stan. Her loyal stooge flicked the switch. The room darkened. Just a glowing white rectangle projected on the wall behind her. Now, she said, let's look at the evidence. She clicked the remote in her hand. Slide 1, a high-resolution scan of the HOA's official bank statement, specifically a highlighted line showing a $1,500 payment to Blake Consulting Services. A ripple went through the room. Gasps, Confused murmurs. Karen blinked. This isn't... She clicked again. Slide 2. The year-to-date expense summary. Another line. Another payment. Same company. Same amount. Slide 3. A full breakdown. 4 years of payments, over $90,000, all to the same fake business. Karen froze. It took her a second too long to understand what was happening. Jack? What is this? She snapped, stepping toward the table. I leaned into the mic. I just put in the drive you gave me, Karen. That single sentence echoed like thunder. And then, Melissa stood. I think you should keep going, she said, her voice ringing through the room. This is all very illuminating. I clicked again. Slide 4, Arizona Business Registry results. Blake Consulting Services, listed as a sole proprietorship. Owner, Karen Blake. A woman near the back gasped. You've been paying yourself? Fred, arms crossed in the corner, stepped forward. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence. Chaos erupted. Shouts. Accusations. Those fines were fake. Was that my repainting money? You fined my son for sidewalk chalk? To pay yourself? Karen backed against the podium, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. This is doctored, she screeched. This is a smear campaign. He hacked the files. It's all a setup. But no one believed her. Not anymore. Stan and Margaret were ghost pale, looking like they wanted to disappear into the floor. A voice boomed from the back. Old Mr. Pearson with the bad knee. I second Fred's motion. Dozens of hands shot. Up. Only 2 stayed down. Karen's and a proxy ballot from her absentee nephew. She had been dethroned in a matter of minutes. When the lights came back on, she wasn't standing at the podium anymore. She was just small, diminished. The queen was nothing. She didn't storm out. She staggered, shaken, beaten, but not finished. She turned as she left, her eyes locking on Grandpa, then on me. The look she gave was something I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. It was a promise that this wasn't over, not even close. And deep down, I knew she meant it. But for that moment, we had won. The neighborhood had risen. The fear was gone. Grandpa was safe. The garage was his again, and Karen Blake had been exposed. Or so we thought. We celebrated that night. Pizzas, cheap champagne. Fred dropped by with a 6-pack and a grin wider than the state line. Jack, he said, shaking my hand, I haven't seen this street smile in 5 years. And it was true. Lawn flamingos returned. Kids played on the sidewalks. A Christmas wreath showed up in August, just because. We thought we'd won the war. But in truth, we'd only won the battle. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Linda. Her voice was shaking. Jack, she whispered, it's all gone. What is? The reserve account, the HOA's savings. She transferred everything. $154,000. Yesterday, I sat down. Hard. She took it all, Linda said. Before the vote, while everyone was watching. While we were busy exposing her, she was busy stealing everything. I hung up. Numb. Melissa watched the blood drain from my face. What is it? I couldn't speak for a long time. When I did, I said just one thing. She was never planning to stay. We hadn't stopped her. We'd distracted her. While we played chess, Karen Blake stole the entire board. The celebration had barely faded from our walls when the truth punched a hole right through our victory. Karen Blake hadn't just been defeated. She'd vanished. With everything. $154,000 gone in a single wire transfer. Our big public takedown? The vote, the slideshow, the crowd cheering. That wasn't the end. It was a distraction. A carefully timed curtain drop while she escaped through the back door with the vault, and I let her do it. The realization hit me like a slow, suffocating wave. She didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She planned it. Every second. From the moment Linda refused to talk to Melissa at the animal shelter. Karen must have known. She knew we were coming. She let us come. The embarrassment, the public. Shame, that was her smokescreen. Her final performance before disappearing off the grid with a heist big enough to buy silence forever. And somehow, that hurt more than all the fines, all the abuse, even the sirens outside Grandpa's door. Because I hadn't just been beaten, I'd been used. The sense of failure was like wet cement. Melissa stood in the kitchen reading Linda's text over my shoulder. She really took all of it, she whispered. Everything? I nodded. Every last dollar. And then I had to go next door and tell the man we thought we'd saved that we hadn't saved him at all. Grandpa was in his garage, finally, smiling again, tools laid out, a bottle of car polish in one hand. The Mustang's hood cracked open like a promise. You and I should take her out for a spin once we clear out these brutes, he said, nodding toward the 2 trucks still jammed, into his bay. Feels like I haven't driven in a century. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I didn't want to. But his smile slowly faded when he saw my face. What is it? He asked, already knowing. She drained the HOA account, I said quietly. $154,000. Gone. His hand dropped to his side. The bottle hit the floor and rolled. So she won after all, he muttered. She got the last laugh. The weight of it crushed me, because it was my plan, my clever public takedown, my brilliant reversal, and I'd given her the perfect cover. I'm sorry, I said, my throat dry. But Grandpa didn't say anything. He just sat on the workbench and stared at the wall. The man who built houses with his hands, who raised a family with grit and calluses, just sat there. Still. Defeated again. I walked away, but I didn't go inside. I stood in our backyard until the sun dipped below the hedges and the cicadas buzzed louder than my thoughts. She thinks she's free. She thinks she's won. And that's when I felt it. Not rage, not panic, something colder, sharper, determined. No, I whispered. She doesn't get the last laugh. Because people like Karen don't disappear. They hide, and the more they think they're safe, the more mistakes they make. The hunt for Karen Blake began that night, but it didn't look like a movie chase. It looked like sleepless nights. Late hours in my home office, screens glowing, tabs open, coffee gone cold, fingers tapping. My day job was in IT security. I built digital walls for companies, firewalls, secure servers, threat detection. Now I was going to tear one down. Hers. My first call was to Officer Diaz. She listened calmly, took notes, and promised to put out a bulletin. But she was honest. Jack, she said gently, she could be anywhere. That kind of money buys silence. You'll be lucky to find a shadow. I didn't tell her I wasn't planning on getting lucky. I was planning on getting smart. People like Karen Blake always leave breadcrumbs. Their arrogance demands it. I started digging. Her old email accounts. A burner Facebook profile she never fully deleted. Twitter rants about HOA violators and vegan meat substitutes. And then I saw it. Buried. In the friend list, a cousin, location tagged in Arizona, nothing definitive. But it was something. While I worked the digital angle, Melissa handled the human one. She went through every known relative, every public record, every tagged photo and Yelp review she could find. We became our own surveillance unit. For days, it was nothing but silence and stale leads. Until 3:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. Melissa leaned over from her side of the couch. Jack, she whispered, pointing to her screen. Look, it was a photo, a rocky desert landscape, a small wooden cabin in the distance, posted 2 days ago by Karen's cousin. Caption, enjoying the quiet life at the old family place. So, peaceful up here, alone, it was meaningless, but we weren't looking at it alone. We were looking at it with Fred's help. The next morning, I called him. Fred, did Karen ever mention a cabin? He paused. Then, funny you ask. I remember her yelling at the mailman once, told him, I wish I was at the cabin. No people, no idiots, just peace. I asked where. She said, "None of your business." Said her ex got it in the divorce. Arizona, I think. That was it. 3 pieces, 1 cousin, 1 comment. 1 location, I pulled up property records, found a plot of land listed under her ex-husband's name. Remote, deserted, surrounded by government land, perfect for hiding, perfect for laundering money, packing up, disappearing. She's there. I said to Melissa, her face tightened. "What are you going to do?" I met her eyes. "Find her." "Alone?" "I'm not kicking down doors," I promised. "I'm going to confirm, take photos, send a location to Diaz, let the law do its job." But the truth was, I didn't know if I could wait that long. I packed light, drove long, crossed state lines in silence, watching mile markers tick by like drum beats. The road narrowed, then cracked, then turned to dust. I found the dirt path Fred described, barely visible from the highway. I parked half a mile out, walked desert wind in my ears, sweat on my back, a camera phone in one hand, a printed bank statement in the other. Then, the cabin. Small, faded wood, 1 chimney, tarped windows, and parked right beside it, a white Lexus SUV. Bingo. I crept closer, staying behind brush and rock. Found a window in the back, peered inside. There she was, Karen Blake, unrecognizable, hair in a bun, no makeup, sweatpants, surrounded by bags, cash, tens of thousands, fanned out like a poker game, and on the table, bank documents, fake ones, with Hank's name. She wasn't just escaping. She was framing him. I saw red, and I forgot the plan. I walked straight to the door and kicked. The frame cracked. The door flew open. Karen spun around, eyes wide. "You!" she screamed. I stepped in, silent, steady. "It's over," I said. She tried to lie, said she was vacationing, said she had permission. Then she offered me half. "I can make this go away," she said. "We can both walk away rich." I didn't answer, because outside, gravel crunched. A second car door slammed. I had already sent my location to Diaz before leaving the highway. She came fast, with 2 local deputies behind her. "Karen Blake," Diaz said as she entered. "You're under arrest." She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She just stared at me, like she finally realized she'd lost. They didn't put her in cuffs right away. Officer Diaz let the silence speak first. Karen stood in the middle of that dusty cabin, surrounded by duffel bags and loose stacks of cash, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. But not enough for her to admit it. She was still trying to pretend that she wasn't caught, that this wasn't real. But when the local deputy stepped forward and pulled her wrists behind her back, something inside her broke. Not visibly. Not with a scream or a breakdown, just a flicker in her eyes. Like she'd finally understood. The story was over. Karen Blake, former HOA tyrant, was under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and financial abuse of a community trust account. I didn't gloat. Didn't say a word. Because, even standing there, with everything exposed, she still looked like someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her. That was her gift. And her curse. Diaz turned to me as the cuffs clicked into place. "You did good, Jack," she said. I nodded, but the adrenaline had already started to drain from my body, leaving me hollow. Tired. She was planning to frame my grandfather, I said, motioning toward the forged bank documents on the table. Diaz scanned them, her mouth tightening. "We'll get a full statement," she said, "and we'll make sure the DA sees it." Karen didn't speak as they walked her out. She just kept her chin high, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Back home, it was like the air had changed. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. The same neighbors who once peeked through their blinds with fear now flooded the sidewalks, celebrating with barbecues and paper lanterns. Westgate Meadows was breathing again. Fred stood on his porch holding a sparkler like it was the 4th of July. "No more beige tyranny!" he shouted, toasting the sky. The 2 giant trucks were finally towed from Grandpa's garage. The Mustang rolled out like a liberated prisoner. Grandpa spent the afternoon polishing the chrome like he was sanding away months of pain. He didn't say much, just smiled, the quiet kind, The kind that says, "I've waited a long time for this." Linda Park was elected interim HOA president by unanimous vote. She cried during her acceptance speech, said she never wanted power, only peace. Then she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was the original signed complaint she'd drafted against Karen years ago. Never filed. Too scared. She handed it to me. "Burn it," she said. "I don't need it anymore." The bylaws were rewritten, the dumbest rules shredded first. Fred held a mock funeral for the beige curtain mandate. The Hendersons painted their home any color they wanted. Even Fred's ridiculous lawn flamingos came back, in LED. For the first time in years, Westgate Meadows wasn't afraid, was free. And for a while, that was enough. We had our porch back, our silence, our Mustang. Grandpa even built a new workbench. Said it was time to start fresh. I thought the story was over. But stories like this don't end when the villain's caught. They end when the damage they left behind finally stops echoing. And we weren't quite there yet. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, I got a call from Officer Diaz. "Hey, Jack, you got a minute?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything okay?" There was a pause, just long enough for my stomach to tighten. "We've recovered most of the stolen funds," she said. "But there's a complication." I stepped into the hallway. Melissa looked up from the living room, concern in her eyes. I shook my head. Slightly, not now. "What kind of complication?" Diaz sighed. "The cabin Karen used, the property was under her ex-husband's name. And the money she funneled into that Blake consulting account, she wired part of it through 3 separate dummy corporations. And 2 of them are offshore, which means there's a chance not everything comes back. I didn't care about offshore shell companies. I cared about what was next." "She's making a deal, isn't she?" I said. Diaz hesitated. "They're trying to fast-track a plea. She's offering full restitution, what's recoverable anyway, in exchange for a reduced sentence." Of course. Karen wasn't done yet. She didn't scream when they cuffed her because she knew this was coming. The system she abused for so long. She'd found a way to use it again. I thanked Diaz and hung up. The air in the house felt colder somehow. When I told Melissa, she nodded slowly. "She always finds a way to keep some of the power." "She won't keep this neighborhood," I said. "That part's over." But a part of me wasn't so sure, because something was still bothering me. A detail I couldn't shake. Back at the cabin, she'd left those forged documents with Grandpa's name out in the open. Not hidden. Not even in a drawer. Almost like she wanted me to find them. Almost like, no. That's paranoia. Still, it sat in the back of my skull like a splinter. Until a week later. When the first anonymous letter arrived. No return address, typed, generic font. 4 words. He's not innocent either. Inside, a photocopy of an old HOA fine filed against Grandpa, signed by Karen. The charge? Unauthorized business activity. Birdhouse. She fined him for selling a handmade birdhouse to a neighbor's granddaughter. It was laughable, until the second letter came, this time with a photo. Grainy, black and white. Hank in the garage, the Mustang in the background. But there, on the workbench, a stack of what looked like unreported cash. It didn't mean anything, did it? Then a third letter. This one hit harder. An old financial document from Hank's account, a deposit, 20 years ago, from a development firm. Settlement for forced land relocation. Melissa studied it over my shoulder. I thought Grandpa worked for himself his whole life. He did, I said, though suddenly I wasn't sure. I brought the papers to him that evening, showed them, waited. At first, he chuckled. Karen's reaching from prison now? That's sad. But then, his smile faltered. Where did you get that second one? He asked, voice tight. It came in the mail, I said. No return address. Grandpa, is there something you want to tell me? His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Not at first. He just sat down. Slowly. This doesn't change what she did, he said finally. Doesn't excuse it. I know that. But if there's something I don't know, there's a lot you don't know, Jack, he snapped, then sighed. Things I kept buried because I thought they didn't matter anymore. What things? He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Let's take a drive." An hour later, we were 15 miles outside of town, standing in front of a strip mall, 2 restaurants, a vape shop, a pharmacy. Grandpa pointed to the ground. "Right here. This used to be my dad's land, my childhood home." "They forced him out?" He nodded. "They said it was for community development, eminent domain. They offered us pennies. We fought. We lost. And the settlement? After I moved back years later, I found out the firm was dirty. They paid us again privately to make it go away. That's the document you saw." "And the other stuff?" I asked. "The cash in the garage, the birdhouses, the workshops?" He was silent again. "I was bending the rules," he admitted. "I didn't care about bylaws. I just wanted to work with my hands, make things, sell a few, keep busy." "Karen tried to use that against you." "She did use it." He paused. "Maybe I gave her more reasons than I should have." I looked at him differently then. Not with judgment, but with clarity. Karen was still the villain, still the abuser. But Grandpa? He wasn't perfect. He never was. And somehow, that made him more human, more real, more mine. As we stood there, headlights passed on the highway behind us, he turned to me. "You still think I'm the good guy?" I didn't hesitate. "You're not the good guy because you never made a mistake," I said. "You're the good guy because you never stopped trying to be better." He looked down at the pavement beneath our feet. Then, for the first time in a long time, he smiled. "You always did have your grandmother's heart. You don't expect ghosts to send letters. You expect them to haunt you silently, with shadows and whispers. But Karen Blake? She didn't do silence. Not in life, and not after her arrest." The day after Grandpa confessed about the land settlement and the birdhouses, another envelope showed up. Same plain paper, same mechanical font. But this time, it wasn't about Grandpa. This time, it was about me. Inside was a copy of an email, dated 6 years ago, from my former employer, back when I worked freelance IT. It was a routine termination notice, budget cuts, downsizing, but the subject line was underlined in red ink. Security. Audit breach. Melissa read over my shoulder, brows furrowed. "I thought you left that job voluntarily." "I did," I said, but I was lying, not to her. Not to myself, to the version of me I tried to be, the one who didn't drag mistakes behind like rusted chains. That job? It didn't end well. A careless error. A contractor I trusted left a back door open in the system. A minor breach. But still. My team. My oversight. And someone had kept a copy of that email. Someone like Karen. I stared at the page, my hands ice cold. She was building something. Even from a jail cell, or at least trying to. The next day, Fred waved me over from his porch. He looked uneasy. "You see this?" he said, handing me his phone. It was a text thread from the neighborhood group chat. Not the public one. The private one. The old guard of HOA loyalists that Karen used to favor. And the conversation? Full of doubt. Not about Karen. About us. About Hank. About me. She broke the law, but they're no angels either. He manipulated the vote. He only exposed her because she went after his grandpa. Should we really be following them now? I handed the phone back, my throat dry. "She's poisoning the well," I said. Fred nodded. "And she doesn't need to be free to do it." She was planting seeds, doubt, division, distrust. It was the one thing she'd always been best at, making people second-guess their neighbors, and it was working. At the next HOA meeting, the attendance was thin. Linda looked nervous. Melissa was stone-faced. I stood in the back and watched a motion stall, not because anyone opposed it, but because no one wanted to commit. Karen had broken something in this neighborhood, something deeper than bylaws. She had broken trust, and as we sat down to dinner that night, candles flickering on the porch, Mustang parked out front like a warhorse at rest, Grandpa said something I hadn't expected. "She's not done." I looked at him. "She's behind bars, Grandpa." He shook his head. "She doesn't need to be here. She's trained them. Too well." "She trained them?" I asked, half skeptical. "You think fear doesn't leave fingerprints?" He said quietly. "You think people forget how to cower after years of it?" He wasn't wrong. The human mind doesn't unlearn fear just because the shadow moves. It waits for the next one. That night I went digging, not for Karen's past, for her present. Where was she now? What jail? What facility? I called Diaz. She sounded tired. "Officially?" she said. "Karen Blake is in the county detention center awaiting trial. She's under observation. No visitors, no outside contact, just lawyers." "And unofficially?" I asked. Diaz hesitated. "There's a rumor," she said. "One of the guards said she's been using her lawyer to send messages. Legal memos. He called them, dozens of them, some of them oddly specific." "Specific how?" "Names, addresses, notes that reference board members. Even a few labeled personal follow-up." My skin crawled. Karen was using her legal rights to funnel poison back into the neighborhood. Paper bullets disguised as paperwork. And nobody could stop her, not without infringing on attorney-client privilege. She was playing the long game again. If she couldn't rule Westgate Meadows by presence, she'd rule it by paranoia. I thanked Diaz and hung up. Melissa leaned against the wall behind me, arms crossed. "She's rebuilding from inside a jail cell," she said. "Who does that?" "Someone who knows people better than rules," I replied. That's when Melissa's eyes narrowed. "There's only one way to stop her." I looked up. We cut off her supply chain. The next few days, we worked quietly, behind the scenes, like gardeners trying to unearth weeds without disturbing the flowers. Melissa reached out to Linda and Fred. I started calling the newer residents, the ones who never really liked Karen but never felt strong enough to say it. We started rebuilding the HOA. Not with laws or loud meetings, but with conversations. Porch talks, shared meals. We let people speak, let them vent, let them be human again. And slowly, things started to change. Then came the final twist. Linda knocked on our door late one evening. Her face pale, her hands shaking. "She sent one to me," she whispered. "A letter? No, a threat." She pulled out an envelope and handed me the paper inside. Typed, plain. "Your vote made you complicit. If I go down for this, I take everyone with me. Remember what you approved." That was it. No name, no signature, but the intent was clear. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was ready to drag the entire HOA board down if it meant leverage. I looked at Melissa, then at Linda. Then I smiled. Not because I was amused, but because I finally saw her weakness. "Karen's not trying to rebuild power," I said. "She's trying to bargain." Melissa frowned. "Why would she need to bargain?" I picked up the paper and tapped it with my finger. "Because she knows she's losing." Karen's greatest strength was fear. But now fear was all she had left. The queen was no longer protecting her castle. She was trying to ransom it, and we weren't going to pay. That night, I typed a letter of my own. I printed it on thick cardstock, signed it, and mailed it to her lawyer. The message was short. Westgate Meadows does not negotiate with tyrants. Tell her we're building something stronger than fear. The final trap wasn't laid with wires or cameras. It was laid with words, and the silence that followed them. After Karen's veiled threat to Linda, the one that said, "If I go down, I take everyone with me," we knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't a bluff. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a play, a final bid for leverage. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't fathom, was that Westgate Meadows wasn't afraid of her anymore. We weren't just surviving her. We were evolving because of her. The neighborhood that once whispered behind closed blinds was now having loud conversations on front lawns. People who'd barely nodded at each other for years were swapping recipes and babysitting schedules. Fred was organizing. a fall block party. Linda had started a chalk your walk challenge for the kids. Even the Hendersons, once the quietest couple on the block, painted a mural on their backyard fence. Life was coming back, and fear? It was running out of oxygen, but we still needed one thing: closure, finality, and that required something the HOA rarely allowed: an emergency vote, open to the entire community, a special referendum. The question was simple: should Karen Blake be permanently banned from serving on or advising any HOA in the county, now or ever again? It wouldn't change the court's verdict. It wouldn't stop her prison games, but it would erase her legacy, strip her name from every file, every bylaw, every meeting minute. It would make her what she feared most: forgotten. But passing that motion required a 75% vote, and Karen still had her loyalists, scared ones, compromised ones, those who weren't sure if she was done collecting dirt. We set the date: Friday, 6 p.m. at the community center, exactly 1 year to the day since she fined Grandpa for excessive garage clutter. I don't believe in signs, but I do believe in poetry. The room was packed. No food, no music, just tension. Linda sat at the front table, pale but composed. Melissa and I took seats in the third row. Fred stood by the door like a bouncer, arms folded, watching everyone who entered. And just before the meeting began, a woman walked in that made the whole room go silent. Hair. Gray now. Slower than she used to be, but still sharp, still tall. Grandma June. Hank's wife. My grandmother. We hadn't seen her in years, not since she moved upstate to care for her sister. But now, here she was, holding a folder and a purpose. She walked straight up to Linda and whispered something, then turned to the crowd. "May I say a few words?" she asked. No one objected, not even the former loyalists. When Grandma June spoke, people listened. She stepped up to the microphone, voice clear, steady. "I lived in this neighborhood long before Karen Blake ever did," she began. "I watched it grow, I watched it laugh, and then I watched it go quiet." She paused. "Not for drama, for memory. For years, I watched my husband battle a woman who never learned the difference between authority and control. And I watched many of you, my friends, my neighbors, become smaller under her shadow. A few people looked away. Others nodded. But shadows only grow when the light steps back." She opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers. "These are letters," she said. "Dozens of them. From neighbors. From people who were fined, threatened, harassed. People who felt alone." She held one up. "This one's from a mother whose autistic son was ticketed for sidewalk chalk. Another, this one's from a veteran who was told his front yard flag was too aggressive." She looked at the room. Karen's loyalists shifted in their seats. "She didn't just abuse power," Grandma said. "She convinced you it was normal." Silence. Then a single clap. Fred. Then another. Then the room erupted. Not with noise, but with permission. Permission to feel again, to be angry, to be honest, to say no more. Grandma stepped back, eyes wet, but proud. Linda stood next, cleared. Her throat, all those in favor of the motion to permanently ban Karen Blake from any HOA role. "Raise your hand." They went up. Row by row, reluctant ones, defiant ones, even Karen's former lapdogs. Fred counted silently, then nodded. 81%, he announced. The motion passed. The room breathed, the vote was done, but Karen wasn't. Not. Yet, that night, just after 10 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a file attachment, a scanned document, one I recognized immediately. It was a copy of the land settlement Grandpa had shown me. But this time, annotated, with a handwritten note in the margin, "Maybe the apple doesn't fall far after all." I stared at it, felt my jaw clench. Melissa read it over my shoulder. "She's still trying to smear him." "No," I said. "She's trying to smear me now. Shift the focus. She's desperate. She's dangerous." And she was. Because the next morning, someone left a flyer on every doorstep. No name, no contact info, just a bold title. Meet the real faces of Westgate. It included a photo of me at a college protest, a photo of Grandpa arguing with a tow truck driver, a doctored bank receipt showing a false donation, every item twisted, reframed, weaponized, and at the bottom, Karen Blake was silenced. But truth can't be. That was it. No credits, no claims, just poison. Fred found his in the mailbox. Linda's was duct-taped to her car. Even Grandma June had one in her flower bed. This wasn't just desperation. This was Karen's final virus, designed to spread after the host had already been removed. A self-replicating lie. Melissa turned to me after breakfast, eyes calm, voice soft. We need to go back to the beginning. To where? She looked out. The window, to Grandpa's garage, where it all started. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil, the same scent I remembered from my childhood. Before Karen Blake, before the fines and fake violations, before the fear. Melissa stood just inside the doorway, watching Grandpa lean over his workbench. The Mustang's hood was open again, but not for repairs, for ritual, for peace. The flyers were still fresh in our minds. Karen's last whisper, sliding under doors like smoke, trying to choke out the truth one last time. But the fire was almost out, and we had one more move to make. I want to show people the real story, I said quietly, placing my phone on the workbench. Grandpa didn't look up. You think they'll believe it? I don't care if everyone does, I replied. I care that someone does. Grandpa finally turned. I don't want to be a martyr, he said. I just wanted to be left alone. You're not a martyr, Melissa said from behind me. You're the reason this place still has a heartbeat. He didn't respond. Not right away. Then he said, What did Karen send you this time? I pulled out the flyer and laid it on the bench. He scanned it. Sighed. She's playing the long game, he muttered. She's playing her last game, I corrected. But what if it works? He asked. What if people remember this? Not what we did, but what she left behind. I tapped the Mustang's hood gently. Then we show Sai. Them what she couldn't destroy. He gave me a look, quiet approval, then reached under the bench and pulled out a weathered wooden box. I didn't show you this before, he said. Inside were hundreds of photos, not of Karen, not of court papers, but of neighbors, smiling. Children, holding handmade birdhouses, veterans with flags, kids in Halloween costumes on the porch, a wedding held in the driveway. This, he said, is the neighborhood she never got to control. We spent the next week building a website. No politics, no rants, just photos, stories, faces, truth. We called it Westgate Unfiltered. Melissa posted it in the group chat first. Fred shared it to the entire HOA directory. Linda printed QR codes and stuck them to mailboxes, and people clicked. They read, they remembered. The lie only works when it's louder than the memory. We made sure the memory was louder. That Saturday, we held the block party Fred had promised. The whole street showed up, tables, with homemade pies, paper lanterns, a bounce house. The Mustang rolled out of the garage, polished, proud. Kids climbed inside. Grandpa let them honk the horn. Even the Hendersons played music through an old speaker. Not HOA approved, and nobody cared. Grandma June passed out lemonade and reminded people that resistance didn't have to look like fire. Sometimes it looked like joy, and for the first time in years, no one talked about Karen, no one whispered her name. The silence was her defeat, and that was louder than any trial could ever be, until the real silence came. 2 weeks later, Officer Diaz called again. Her voice was careful, almost too steady. Jack. Karen's gone. I paused. Gone? She was being transferred to a federal facility. Heart failure. On the road. Didn't make it. I sat down, not because I was grieving, but because I didn't know what to feel. Karen Blake, the tyrant of Westgate Meadows, was dead. Just like that. No sentencing. No prison memoir. No long goodbye. Just gone. Like a storm that didn't get the last thunderclap. Melissa walked in. She read my face before I said a word. She's dead? I nodded slowly. We sat in silence for a long time. Then Melissa said, "It's over." But was it? Because a week later, the final letter arrived, postmarked 3 days before her death. The envelope was yellow, thin. Inside, one photo of Grandpa standing in front of the Mustang, smiling, and scrawled on the back in red ink. Funny, isn't it? I built this kingdom, but he'll be the one they remember. That was it. No signature, no venom, no threat, just truth. Because even Karen knew, at the end, she lost. Not in court, not in prison, but in memory, in legacy. She'd spent years ruling with fear. But Grandpa? He ruled by example, quiet strength, patience, kindness that never asked for applause. The kind of power you can't take with a vote, you can only earn. At the next HOA meeting, someone asked to name the community center after Karen, as a joke. No, one laughed. Instead, Fred stood up and made a new motion to name it after Hank Foster Community Hall. The vote? Unanimous. Even the old guard raised their hands, and when the plaque was revealed, bronze, simple, Grandpa just shook his head. "Don't need my name on a building," he muttered. "You don't," I said. "But the neighborhood does," Dr. He looked at me, eyes glassy, but proud. "You did good, kid." "No," I said. "We did." The story of Karen Blake wasn't about how she ruled, it was about how we rose after her, how we remembered who we were before the fear, how we rebuilt. Not just porches and bylaws, but trust, and in the end, the strongest communities don't come from control. They come from kindness, from resilience, from remembering that dignity isn't about being perfect. It's about standing, again and again, when someone tries to knock you down, and when the next Karen comes, because someone always does. We won't be blindsided, we'll be ready. Because Westgate Meadows isn't a place ruled by fear anymore. It's a place rebuilt by people, and remembered by heart.